Hey everybody, I want to make a video about Beatles compilation albums. So, greatest hits, like love songs, compilation rock and roll compilations, those kind of things. So not the official studio albums, just compilations. And the interesting thing about Beatles compilations is that very few of them were really put together with the Beatles input. A lot of the times they were just done by the record label or even their, at the time, manager. So, kind of an interesting story about their compilations. So, we'll start off with the very first one that was ever released, and it's called A Collection of Beatles Oldies. This is released in 1966 originally. This is an early 70s pressing, but originally this album was released in 1966, and it was after Revolver, but before Sgt. Pepper. So, the Christmas time was coming up, and the Beatles didn't have a new product because they were recording Sgt. Pepper. So EMI decided, well, we should put out something for the Christmas market. So they put out this basically greatest hits compilation. So it says a collection of the Beatles oldies, and on the back it says but goodies. And this album for me has my favorite back cover of any Beatles album. I just think it's so cool. I just love the layout, and I love the actual photo of the Beatles in their hotel room in Japan. And also, this album is known because if you're into the Paul is dead myth, this has some clues on it. And one of the main clues is that there's this guy sitting here, and then there's this car heading straight for his head. And in the Paul is dead mythology, there's all kinds of things about, he died in a car, he blew his mind out in a car. So that's one of the clues. Anyway, this album was the very first Beatles compilation, official compilation released by the band. And I think they had some input in it because I know in Mark Lewiston's book about the recording sessions, he talks about how George Martin did some special mixes just for this record. So obviously if George Martin was involved, that means the Beatles were probably involved as well to some extent. They knew about it and all that kind of stuff. So the earliest songs on here are For Me to You and She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand. Those are the early songs. You don't get Love Me Do on this, but you do get those early ones. And then the newest songs on this are obviously from '66, so Revolver. So you have Eleanor Rigby, Paperback Writer, and Nils Submarine appear on this. Also, for the very first time in the UK and in Europe, you got the song Bad Boy, which was originally recorded in 1965 for the American market for the album Beatles 6. But for the British people, the first time they were able to hear that song was on this compilation. So this was kind of a big deal at the time. And I'll show you what my vinyl looks like here. It's on the silver and black Parlophone, which dates it in like the early to mid 70s. And I remember seeing this compilation in a lot of record stores when I was younger, and I was always really interested in it, but I never bought it because I had all the songs anyway, or I thought I had all the songs. But then I bought it, and I've always really liked this one a whole lot, so it's really cool. It also has some unique mixes on it that are that appeared for the first time on here, like a lot of stereo mixes. So cool to have that in the collection. Then the second Beatles compilation was this, Hey Jude, or sometimes known as The Beatles Again. And this was released after Abbey Road, but before Let It Be. I believe that's true. I could be a little wrong with my timeline there. But basically this consists of all of the Beatles singles, A and B sides up to that point that hadn't been put out on Capitol Records, or on the American stuff. So you get, it's kind of a weird mixture of songs. You get Hey Jude, Revolution, Paperback Writer. Then you get I Should Have Known Better, Lady Madonna, Can't Buy Me Love, Don't Let Me Down, Battle of John and Yoko, Rain, and Old Brown Shoe. But I really like this compilation a whole lot, and mine has this dumb hole in it there that they would put in there, I guess, for marking it as a used record or whatever. I don't know exactly what the reason for that hole is. If anyone knows, comment below, because I'd like to know the official reason why there was that hole in there. But The reason I have this is because it's in such good condition, except for that hole. Here's what the record looks like. It's on Apple Records. And there's the B-side. And like I said, I really love the Hey Jude compilation. I think it's really cool. And I think it was put together by Alan Klein, their, at the time, manager, or at least the manager of John, George, and Ringo. Paul wasn't keen on Alan Klein, but I think it was put out by him, put together by him as like a instant money making thing, and I'm sure it was. So I also like the cover, shot at John's house. This is the very last time that all the Beatles were together for a photo session. And again on the back there. And that's the house that John recorded the Imagine album in. So that's kind of a cool looking record sleeve, I'd say. Okay, now on to probably the two most recognizable and the two compilations that probably everyone has, or has heard at least. The Red and the Blue album. These were put out in 1973, and they were really compiled by Alan Klein again. And they were really put out because at the time there was a bootleg called Alpha Omega, which was a greatest hits box set, basically. It was being sold on television and like officially sold, but it wasn't officially sanctioned by the Beatles at all. So they put these out to stop the sales of the bootleggers making tons of money off of what the Beatles could have just done on their own. So these were put together, and a lot of them had mixes that were not heard before. Like a lot of stereo mixes were done on these two records that you couldn't get anywhere else before. And they really are good collections. I like these ones a whole lot. I listen to these probably the most of any of my compilations of Beatles albums on vinyl. These are the two get the most play from me. And the story with the cover, the photos of these, is that this cover was originally, from the Please Please Me album cover session. This is an outtake. It's a little different than the original Please Please Me cover. And then this cover, shot in the exact same place, was originally shot for the Beatles' Get Back project that never got released. I mean, it eventually became Let It Be. But it was going to be called Get Back, and it had the exact same cover as Please Please Me. Well, they both, well, at least the Let It Be or Get Back wasn't used. So when it came time to put these together, John really pushed to have these two photos as the photos for these covers. And I think that's really cool that he did that. And on the back, you get each of the different ones. So these two compilations are really, really cool. These two happen to be German pressings. And I think maybe you've heard me talk about these before, and they sound so good. In fact, I think this Red album might be one of the best sounding records I own in all of my collection. It just sounds so good. I can't describe to you how good it sounds. Even the mono recordings on here just sound just excellent. And I'll show you the vinyl really quick. Here's the vinyl. You got like the normal Apple label, but with the like red background, which is kind of cool. And yeah, so this compilation was released in 1973, and from what I've read, Paul wasn't really that keen on it. I don't think he had much involvement in it at all. I don't know how much involvement any of the Beatles really had, other than John. It seems like John has been quoted, or at least interviewed, talking about these albums and saying how he pushed for these photos. So he at least had some kind of input in the release of these. But at the time, I think like there was a lot of Beatle activity going on, as far as like Paul was heavily involved with Wings. He had already released Retro Speedway this year, or at least maybe in 72, or maybe it was 73. And was working on Band on the Run. So he was really focused on that. I don't think he wanted to concentrate on the Beatles activities at all. John, on the other hand, was in the middle of his Lost Weekend, or just starting his Lost Weekend. He'd separated from Yoko. He just put out Mind Games. So he was he had some free time. So maybe that's why he was able to devote a little bit more time to these compilations. And George Ringo, I don't know exactly what they were doing, although I think Ringo must have been working on his solo album, and George was probably working on Living in the Material World, his second solo album. So anyway, story of the Red and the Blue albums. Those are probably the most famous compilations there, and probably the best Beatles compilations, really, as far as covering their whole career. And it's not just the hits; it's even has some good album tracks on there as well. So, a great starting point for a lot of Beatles fans. Now we start getting into some of the weirder and, in my opinion, not so great Beatles compilations. In 1976, Capitol Records, the Beatles' contract with EMI and Capitol ran out. So EMI Capitol, what they decided to do, they decided to put out something on their own without the Beatles' input at all, and they put together this compilation called Rock and Roll Music. And this record that I own isn't in the best of shape, and there's a reason for that. I don't like this compilation all that much. I hardly ever listen to it. So the records are in good shape, but this is kind of beaten up. Anyway, the packaging of this, I think, is perhaps one of the worst in the whole Beatles catalog. It's like this weird shiny thing, and it's got these thumbs on here as if there's like they're holding onto the record. In the back, you got this. Then the craziest part of this is the inside gatefold here. You got this like 1950s diner thing going on. The Beatles were and are probably the most important 60s band of all time, and yet they had this like 1950s thing going on, which I don't understand at all. But that's what they chose to do, and okay. I'm sure at the time maybe it's because like that American Graffiti movie had come out or was coming out, so there was like a big 50s revival. But anyway, this is a really weird compilation. The one cool thing about this is it has some mixes on here that are unique to this only. When George Martin was told by Capitol that they were going to make this compilation, he went and listened to some of the recordings, the original tapes, and he didn't like how they sounded, the stereo mixes. So he went and remixed a whole lot of these. Especially like a lot of the earlier songs, he put the bass in the middle, and he even like reversed some of the stereo images. So stuff that was on the right then appeared on the left. So anyway, these are unique mixes, and so it's cool to have that in the sense, and that was the one good thing about the rock and roll album. Other than that, it really was kind of just a weird money-making ploy, I think, on the part of Capitol Records. So I'll show you the vinyl. Again, it's got this like Coca-Cola 50s glass on there. And the other thing I find really annoying about this album is that you get side one. This is record one, side one, right? You flip it over and you expect to see side two. Well, no, you get side 4. Now, I've heard the reason for this is that because apparently in the 70s there were record players that you could have where it would like flip the record, or when you had it in like a jukebox or something, you could like, it had 2 turntables. So if you were playing a double album, you listen to side 1. If it was on a different record, side 2, it could just go to it right immediately and just play it continuously by, it'll be here, then it'd go over to side 2 and play that really fast, and then it'd flip this over. I don't know. So it was like continuous play or something, but it's annoying because that didn't really catch on, obviously. And so if you have just a record player, like I do, then you have to listen to side 1 and then take out the next disc for side 2. Anyway, I just find that very annoying. I have a couple records that are like that, and I always think like, ugh, what a hassle. Anyway, that's rock and roll music. As you can tell, I'm not a big fan of that. Maybe you are. If you are, that's cool. Let me know in the sections below why you are. And then we have another Capitol moneymaker, or attempt at least. This one was called, and I like this one a little bit more than rock and roll music. This is called Beatles Love Songs. And this happens to be a copy that belonged to my dad, and he's given it to me, and it's in pretty bad shape. But again, this is one of those records that if I ever find like a nicer copy for a good price, I'll definitely get it. But there are so many other records that I'd rather have than these weirdo compilations. But this one is, of all of them, this one's kind of cool. So it's got a cool kind of like fake leather look to it. And the best part about it, I think, is the gatefold. You get this really cool Richard Avedon photo, which is nice. And you also get a really cool booklet that came with it, which is really cool. And it has all of the lyrics to the songs. There's something. It's written in like calligraphy, I guess is what you'd call it. So it's really nice that they included that. I think that's a cool feature. And then the actual vinyl itself looks like, I will show you that as soon as I get this in here. Looks like this, which is also kind of cool. So, you know, it's, as far as the compilation goes, it's kind of fun to listen to. I listen to it every once in a while. And, you know, they did kind of nail it as far as putting all the love songs on there. They definitely are all the important Beatles love songs. And, you know, you get all the typical ones that you'd think would be on here. Something, Yesterday, and I Love Her, If I Fell, I'll Be Back. Yes, It Is, I Will, all those, the normal Beatle love songs you'd expect. So it's a double album, and yeah, so this one was released in 1977. And I don't think the Beatles had any input in this whatsoever. As far as, I don't think I've ever heard any of the Beatles comment on that album at all. Okay, now we get into some kind of cool compilations, I think. So, in America and in England, but in America they released the Beatles box set of all the albums in one box. And so they included a bonus disc with all those boxes, and this is what they included. It's called Beatles Rarities. And this is the American version. I'll show you the British version coming up here. It's got this cool cover with this really, I've always liked this cover with that cool photo, like from 1968 during their White Album time period. And when you open it up, you get the Butcher cover, just the photo, and some other interesting photos of the Beatles. And then the back is kind of cool too. And even cooler, the record comes with the vintage Capitol Rainbow label. I think that's kind of a nice touch. And this album is really cool, I think. It doesn't have anything really all that groundbreaking in the sense of a rarity. But at the time, maybe it was kind of a rarity. But, for example, you get Love Me Do, the Ringo with Ringo on drums. You get Misery and There's a Place, which seem weird because you're like, well, those are on Please Please Me. Why do I want those? Except, in America, there was no Please Please Me album. It was just broken up into all these different kind of albums. There was a lot of the Please Please Me songs. Some of them were on Meet the Beatles. I think a few maybe ended up on the Beatles' second album, and then a lot of them ended up on an album called The Early Beatles, which is a compilation by Capitol, which I didn't include here in this video because, I don't know, it was an attempt at a real album. It wasn't really a compilation, I would say. So I didn't include it. But anyway, maybe it can be classified as a compilation. But so all the songs were on there, except the two songs from Please Please Me that were not on any of those Capitol released albums were Misery and There's a Place. Those were released, though, on the VJ label. But anyway, I think Capitol wanted to put them on here, so here they are. Then you get the German version of She Loves You. Now you start getting into true rarities. You get a version of And I Love Her with some extra at the end. There's a guitar riff. You get 2 extra guitar riffs at the end. I know, it's not that big of a deal, but it's cool if you're a Beatle freak to hear something like that. Then you get the version of Help, the mono version of Help, with a different John lead vocal that in America you would never have heard, but in Britain it's a very common thing. If you had the mono Help, you heard that, or the single Help, you heard that vocal. Then you get the British version of I'm Only Sleeping, which again, to all of us now, it's not a big deal because that's the normal version we all hear, but in America in 1970, or I guess this is 1980, that was a big deal. Then you get my favorite track on here, I'm the Walrus. This is a really cool version that has a couple extra beats after John sings I'm Crying and right before Yellow Mother Custard. It also has, I think, a little bit of a different intro as well. So that's a cool thing to have. In fact, that alone makes owning this worth it because that doesn't appear anywhere else, this version of I'm the Walrus. You can't get it on CD. You have to get it on either vinyl or maybe they made a cassette of this. I don't know if they did. Then you get a version of Penny Lane that has some extra trumpet at the end, which is also really cool. Now we start getting into stuff that, in my opinion, isn't really worth all that much. You get the mono version of Helter Skelter, the mono version of Don't Pass Me By. Those are easy to find, but at the time I guess they weren't. Then you get the B-side of Lady Madonna, The Inner Light, which is totally common. Then you get Across the Universe from the Charity album, and you get the B-side of Let It Be, You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, again, very common. And you get the Sgt. Pepper, Inner Groove. Okay, cool. I still like this album a whole lot. I think it's really fun to listen to, and I regard it highly in my collection. I'd like to find a better version of it, actually, a little bit. The vinyl's in good shape, and this is in pretty good shape, the sleeve, but I like to get a little bit crisper, cleaner version of it, so someday I will. Now, for the British Rarities, I have two exact same albums. They're just different releases. This is the one that came in the box set, the British box set, and it's kind of hard to see. It's pretty dark. There you can see a little bit better. There's the back. And then this is the one that was just released as a standalone. You didn't have to buy the box. You could just buy this. And it's the exact same album. So this Rarities album, it really doesn't have anything that you don't have or that any of us don't have. All these songs eventually appeared on Past Masters in these versions. So this is really just a collector's item. If you're like me, like a Beatle freak, and you want to get everything that has the name Beatles on it, you will buy these. They do sound really good. The sound quality is really, really nice. I actually do listen to this a little bit more than I think I really ever would before I had it. So it's nice to own. Again, those were released in like the 80s. I think it's like the late 70s, early 80s is that Beatles British Rarities album. Okay, then we get something kind of weird. This is called The Beatles 20 Greatest Hits. This is released in 1982. And the only thing that is unique about this, you get a version of Hey Jude that has been edited down. So it says Hey Jude, what does it say? Short version. Now, I don't quite understand why they did this. I mean, I understand because they were trying to save space. They only wanted to have a single album. Except in doing so with this single album, they made two huge mistakes. Number one, editing Hey Jude, probably one of the best songs ever, is a real dumb move. Why edit Hey Jude down? That's very stupid. But they did it, so it did create a unique version, I guess, on here. So that's kind of cool, I suppose. But then the other mistake they made is that they put, on side one, there are 12 songs on here. Maybe you can see that. Now, that's way too many songs to have on one side. And what that does is it creates the album to be really quiet. So all the songs are really quiet and really dull, in my opinion. And that sucks because this is a Capitol Purple label, and you know how much I love the Capitol Purple labels. And in fact, this one's even mastered by Wally. He's my guy. He's the one, when I look for purple labels, he's the guy I want to have his name etched in the dead wax. Wasn't his fault, though. They made him do this, so there's 12 songs on this side, and there's 8 songs on this side, one of them including Hey Jude, which we know is a long song, even edited down. This one is still 5 minutes long. So it's kind of a drag that they decided to do this. They could have just made this into two albums, and it would have been, the sound quality would have been really nice, and all would have been good. But they decided not to do that because they were trying to save money, I suppose. And, oh well, that's okay. So, as I'm sure a lot of you know, this isn't one of my favorite Beatles compilations, but I'm happy to own it all the same. So that's Beatles 20 Greatest Hits. Then we get something that's very common. In the 80s, when they put out the CDs, the first CDs of the Beatles, they decided that they should put out this Past Masters album, and it just contains all the common recordings we've always heard. Then during the 2012 or 2009 remasters, they put out this Past Masters all in one. So I should go back. In the 80s, they put out 2 CDs, Past Masters Volume 1, Past Masters Volume 2. Well, with the vinyl, they just put them all together. So this is from the remasters in 2012. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. This is very common. This is a really good set to own. It really, if you have all of the British albums, all the 13, and you include this, you have everything the Beatles ever recorded. So there you go. And then, of course, we come to the Beatles 1 album that was released in, I think, 2001 or 2002. The vinyl wasn't put out until about 2000. Maybe there was some vinyl at the time when they released it in 2000. I don't know. But anyway, this one comes from 2014. This is the remastered version. Then, in 2015, they released this, which is the remastered and remixed version by Giles Martin. I love this remixed version. It sounds so good. The clarity is just amazing. And it doesn't lose that original Beatles magic. They still sound like this one, but just with more clarity to them. So those are the Beatles 1 albums, and I don't need. There's not much to say about the Beatles 1 albums, really. I'm sure you've all heard about it. There you go. That's my Beatles compilation video. Let me know what your favorite compilations are. And by the way, I don't claim to own every single compilation, because obviously I don't. There were tons made, but these are the ones I have and the ones I like. And if I had to pick my favorite of all the compilations, I would pick the red and the blue albums. I just think these ones do the job. All right, let me know what your favorite compilations are, and I'll see you guys next time.